Prey released for the second time in the summer of 2017 to somewhat mixed reception, and after playing it for a few hours, I figured I knew why. Despite the promise of Prey your way, I felt absolutely railroaded into an action game that was constantly looking down on me for failing to better leverage my stealth options. But this won't be a negative retrospective, because while those first few hours felt like a failed imitation of Dishonored in space, it became clear that the action was something far more akin to the original Ratchet and Clank from the PlayStation 2. Yeah, really. And I'm kinda betting that the crosstabs on these two games aren't exactly huge, considering that they released 15 years apart. The Ratchet remake doesn't exactly capture the spirit of what the first game was going for with its gameplay. And that's fine, I love a lot of these games. Prey didn't exactly blow the doors off either, selling far fewer copies than its spiritual predecessor. So given that the Venn diagram of people that have played these games probably looks like this, I'm going to provide some background on what these games are all about before diving into what they have in common. For now, you can consider this a recommendation for both. So, Prey is an open-world immersive sim taking inspiration from games like Deus Ex and System Shock, brought to us from Arcane Studios, the minds behind those excellent Dishonored games. The Morgan of your choosing is responsible for dealing with an alien infestation called the Typhon, who've taken over all of Talos 1, a massive research station orbiting the moon. It's got environments littered with the junk that you might find in Bethesda games, but this time all that junk can be recycled into raw materials, which you can use to craft weapons, ammo, health kits, and neuromods. Those neuromods are then used to buy perks in the upgrade menu, just like the Praxis kits from the modern Deus Ex games. While these start off as mods to increase your health and pick up heavier objects, you soon unlock 3 new trees that provide you with the opportunity to lift the powers of the enemy. Now you can disable the psychic powers of your opponents, or set them ablaze, and you're free to get creative with the environment to lure enemies away from you and toward the traps that you've laid out on the other side of the arena. Now here's the catch. With the exception of the wrench, every piece of damage that you do is using up precious resources. If you're careless, you will find yourself in a room full of phantoms with 2 shotgun shells and a 9mm bullet that you might as well spend on yourself. Ratchet and Clank is a bit different. For one, your resources can always be replenished at the nearest Gadgetron vendor, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Each planet will typically give you 2 or 3 linear paths to explore, each with their own challenges that await you. Some of those paths are optional, most of them aren't, but that more open nature just makes these levels feel a little bit bigger than they actually are, and they almost always loop back in on themselves. At the end of each path, you'll get a story beat moving you on to the next planet, a new gadget, or a new weapon. But most weapons are purchased at those Gadgetron vendors. Now here's the thing, there's no difficulty settings here, and despite its family-friendly appeal, it's a pretty hard game. Every other title is about blasting your way through waves of enemies with your tools of destruction, but Ratchet 2002 takes things a little slower. A lot of its weapons don't do damage directly. The taunter attracts enemies towards you, and the decoy glove gives them a target that isn't you. You can beat this game with just the blaster and the devastator, but doing so doesn't exactly feel great. Later games added strafing and the ability to double jump in any direction, but here your only choice is to be still or actively moving in the direction that you're shooting. And that brings me to my first point of comparison. The Phantoms in Prey outmaneuver you easily. For an immersive sim like this, you're supposed to be able to survive using only your wits, but even beginning an engagement from afar does not guarantee you any sort of victory. A headshot is only going to get one of these firing energy attacks that can come at you too fast to avoid, or a melee swipe that you can't do anything to stop. Engaging your foes directly can be made much easier with some of the game-breaking powers, but if you don't invest in that direction, this really isn't the way to go. In Ratchet, your health is limited and the checkpoints are punishing. It may seem like a good idea to keep moving in and shooting, but you really can't clear these enemies out as quickly as you can approach them, and the aiming is just way too scattershot to reliably keep yourself moving while firing. The direct approach is not rewarded in either of these titles. Instead, you have to use your wits. In Prey, you can identify the weaknesses of each Titan variant by scanning them. Some of these are obvious. Psychic enemies can have their psychic powers disabled by anything with a null wave property. Electric enemies can be disabled by EMPs or stunned with the electric stun gun. Use your brain, people. Not everything is so clear though. For example, these etheric enemies are weak to Q-beam, which, yeah, alright, fine by me. The more that you play, the more that you come to understand the weaknesses of each enemy type, and the more that you'll be able to exploit them. But that's not all. The Typhon have their own behavior as well. Telepaths run away as soon as you disable their psychic powers, and Weavers absolutely book it when they see a Q-beam blast coming their way. Both can make for good opportunities to set up some traps. Phantoms may move quickly, but if you can get the drop on them, they'll fold like I do with a 2, a 7, and royalty in the river. Mimics can take the shape of everyday objects, but if you can recognize an out-of-place chair, you can glue them to the floor before they can surprise you. Ratchet and Clank features different enemies on every single planet, each with unique AI patterns and movements. Then it arranges them in groups that you have to solve. For example, Planet Orkson has these sleeping crabs that are pretty tough to kill. There's a screamer with every group that's just waiting to wake them up if you get too close. But if you can kill them, you can slip right through. Study the environment, maybe you can snipe one using the blaster. Or maybe you can just wake up all the crabs with the taunter and force them to run into a force field and kill themselves. None of that is a far cry from using the flamethrower to destroy these small sand sharks that want to chomp on your heels. Or the walloper to push back these tough bomb-like foes that will self-destruct if you can't do enough damage to get rid of them quickly. My absolute favorite design decision in the original Ratchet, that was abandoned in favor of upping your arsenal, was how each weapon just did something that none of the others could. They filled holes and they often worked together. They did more than just cool things. The bomb glove does a lot of damage, but only to enemies on the ground, and only when they're not too far away. The blaster is a good choice for mid-range encounters, but the pyrocitor makes a better choice at close range, and the Devastator's rockets don't disintegrate like the blaster's pellets. The Glove of Doom is excellent if you're planning on making a real frontal assault, but since these guys can't jump, you have to be conscious of whether they'll be able to hit who you need them to. The suck cannon pulls in tiny dudes so that you can hurl them back at larger ones, but you have to be cautious about using it around enemies that you can't easily suck up. The Devastator and the Visibomb have a range that the blaster just doesn't, but each shot runs on the expensive side, so you want to use them sparingly. The Taunter can lure enemies towards mines, and the Decoy Glove can move them away from you. The Morpho Ray turns dudes into chickens. Alright, so maybe not every weapon filled a hole, but that one is staying. In Ratchet, each encounter was a question. How can I eliminate everyone in front of me with as little ammo as possible, while also minimizing the risk to myself? In Prey, each encounter is approached the same way. I promise you that the comparison starts and stops there, although both games do start you off with a wrench. I'm not suggesting that Arcane was looking for inspiration and consulted this PS2 greatest hit, but as with Titanfall and Tony Hawk, I believe that both studios were asking themselves the same question: how can we make our action more thoughtful? There are games that feel much better to play than these two, but I'll remember Ratchet and Prey for how I felt solving their combat encounters. Thanks for watching.